and welcome to The Bridge to the Bay with Dr. Veras. I'm Dr. Matt Veras, and this is episode 4 with Simon Jefferies. Me and Simon met when we were 10 at an enrichment program and have been best friends ever since, even though our politics have always differed quite a bit. Simon's always been a staunch conservative, even since we were kids, which is a little strange. So we talk about that. But that's what led him into a career in politics, where he's currently a partner at a consulting firm in Toronto that covers political issues across Canada. Now, he worked his way up from being an intern to actually being press secretary for the Ontario government, getting Doug Ford elected. Then he tried his hand at the federal level until he ended up where he is currently. So we talk about his rise throughout these elections from the inside in the war room. And we even talk about Toronto's famous crack-smoking mayor, Rob Ford. So if any of that sounds of interest, please listen along. And if not, hopefully one of the future episodes will be of interest. Well, hey, Simon, how's it going?
Oh, not too bad. Yourself? How are things down in sunny California?
Can't complain. I mean, probably around a similar temperature these days in May, but it definitely made the winter a lot easier for me. It's one of the nicer ones I've had.
You didn't miss the Canadian snow and sleet?
It's just, it's not really my style. I never really integrated with the things you got to do in the winter to stay sane, I think. Like, I don't ski or snowboard or skate or cross-country ski, snowshoe. I don't build snow forts outside. I just don't like the cold, and I don't like, all that comes with it. So I'll take the heat. I think that's my Middle Eastern blood in me. I'd rather the desert and the scalding heat than the cold.
There you go. You're in the right place then.
Yeah. It's worked out. So just for everyone listening, so my friend Simon, we've known each other since we were 10, so we'll get into that. But could you just tell everyone what it is you do, Simon? Because you've had a big boy job for, I think, one of the longest out of our friend group. And you're making big waves in Canada. So could you just maybe broad strokes what it is you do?
Sure. So my background is in politics. Spent pretty much since university, fresh out of university, spent my entire career working in politics for conservative politicians at Queen's Park and on Parliament Hill. But in the last year or so, I've partnered up with a couple of my previous colleagues, and we've started our own consulting company, public affairs company. So we offer a wide range of services, government relations, public relations, crisis communications, basically taking all of the skills each of us have developed over our previous careers in politics, and offering it to our clients to give them the best service offering we can.
Nice. Wow. Was that always in the plans that you might move into something like that, or you're just kind of riding the waves of the election cycles as they came, and you'd make a decision as it came up?
Listen, it's politics is certainly a very cyclical industry. So it's very it changes based off of obviously who's in government. Right. What kind of opportunities present themselves like that. So this is an opportunity to get a little bit more security. Don't have to work the 20-hour days that I used to when I was a political staffer. So this was always kind of in the back of my mind as a next step when I was done mucking around in the mud in politics for the time being. Not saying I won't go back at some point in time though.
Right. Well, I just from the outside, it's been great to see what you've done, what you've accomplished. Because really, you've talked about working in politics since, we were kids, since I knew, I'm sure, since even before then. And to see you actually follow through and take those next steps and, kind of see what you're working on the news, really, right? And develop out in Canada. It's amazing, man. So that's great. I don't know if it's weird to hear, but I'm proud of you, man.
It's great to see you doing it out there.
Well, appreciated.
So how do we know each other? Like when?
So we would have first met, you said 10. I would have had to.
I think it's grade 5, right?
I was probably guessing later than that, but we would have met at Macquarie, right?
Yeah.
Would have been probably the first time we would have crossed paths.
Yeah.
So for people listening, I guess that's kind of like an enrichment program that we both went to, I guess 1 day a week when we were in elementary school. So we would have overlapped at that time. I would have guessed like grade 7 or 8, but you're suggesting even earlier than that?
Because I went to a different school for 7-8, remember?
Oh yeah, so maybe grade 6, 5. You're probably right.
Yeah, it was 5-6.
I'm really going back into my memory bank here, but yeah, so grade 5 or 6, we would have met. We would have went to a 1 day a week kind of enrichment program, and that's where we met and we hit it off right away, and we had lots of fun.
Yeah, for sure. Those times I always remember looking forward to it. It was like a getaway camp once a week. You could take a breath of fresh air. But yeah, it was great that we got along, and back home we actually lived a lot closer than anyone else, I guess, in the classes. We're really quite close, like within walking distance. So yeah, it was nice we could kind of be friends outside of that 1 day a week thing as well.
Yeah, because you went to your kind of K-6 school was Saginaw, right?
Yeah.
Sorry for everybody who isn't familiar with Cambridge geography, but I'm just recollecting my brain here, so just work with me.
Yeah, it's all good. It's just we were supposed to go to the same middle school, right? And then at that point, I got recommended to go to a full-time enrichment program with a bunch of weirdos. So, I had to make the transition of schools anyway. So I figured I'll give it a shot. I'll see what it's like. I didn't want to leave my friends, but I figured I got enough advice from older people, principals, teachers, things like that I should give it a shot. So I figured give it a year, see what happens. I can always go back. But, c'est la vie. It worked out. It was quite nice in the end. But then we got to reconnect in high school where we met back again like nothing ever happened.
Preston Panthers. Go Panthers.
Preston Panthers. So it's really funny how it came back full circle. So, a reason why I think I enjoyed getting to know you so well, as a kid, is that you're really smart, which is obvious. But you often took opposing political views on things than I had. And I didn't really get it, I guess, mostly as a kid. I guess I was just a happy-go-lucky kid, and I think most younger people generally lean left, generally want people to get along. They like people to have their rights and their freedoms, that kind of thing. And my family's liberal, immigrant family, and things like that. But when we'd actually talk about whatever the issue was, I'd find out that the reason you took your stance was very well thought out. And it was based on sort of historical precedent and if there was a bill or a law or something that was enacted, you really took in the weight of what that meant. So what all the consequences could be, whether it was going to happen immediately or not. You were wary enough that there's plenty of historical evidence that if you're not careful with your words, you're not careful with the type of bills or laws that you're passing, that can give the wrong sort of power or, I guess, freedom to use liberties that maybe the government shouldn't, or not everyone would want. So when would you say you discovered you were a conservative?
So I like to joke that I became a conservative when I was 10 years old. That was one of the first kind of elections I remember as a kid. So that was the 2003 Ontario election. And I remember driving somewhere with my family and talking about the election. And I remember saying, that I was cheering for Ernie Eves, the progressive conservative premier, to win because his name was very similar to my favorite golfer at the time, Ernie Els' his name. That's the story I like to tell. Obviously, when you're 10, I don't think you have a clue what any political party believes in, but that was me staking my ground based off of sound reasoning, which is names sounding similar. But then when I was in grade 7 or 8, I can't remember exactly which grade, I had the opportunity to go to Queen's Park and work as a legislative page.
So could you just tell everyone what that is?
Yeah, so the Queen's Park, the Ontario legislature, has a program where they let students in grade 7 or 8, they take them out of this classroom for 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the time period, and puts them to work, working inside the chambers of the legislature. Wow. So you kind of help deliver the mail and make sure that everybody's got the proper paperwork on their desk. Mm-hmm. Give the politicians the water if they're thirsty. You pretty much are little grunts, little minions that run around and just take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Yeah. But as a part of that, you have the opportunity to sit there and witness democracy firsthand. You're in the chambers. You're watching as the politicians are shouting at each other from across the way, and that's really where I kind of really developed, I think, for the first time, a true passion in politics. And it was there, just kind of taking it all in, watching the debates at the time, that I came to the conclusion that I was a conservative, and from there I was hooked, and I went home and I read everything I possibly could. I'd read the news every single day. I'd have magazine subscriptions about current events. Yeah. I'd read political documents. I just consumed everything, and that's kind of where I began to stake out my conservatism, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. It's great that they have a program like that, and it seems to have worked out exactly as whoever would have planned it would have hoped. Right? It's to inspire the next generation to pursue politics.
Yeah,
right?
It's a really incredible program. There's a lot of alumni who've come out of that program who've actually went on to serve as politicians or senior political advisors, or just going on to other great careers that are completely outside of the political world. But I think they still probably picked up good skills through the taking everything in at a pretty young age.
Yeah. That's incredible. Do you remember any particular topics of discussion that you started to see yourself leaning right on? Or was it a general takeaway?
So this is going to sound completely random and out of left field.
Okay.
But it was a minor little fringe issue at the time, but this must have been 2005, 2006. There were farmers in rural Ontario who were dairy farmers, and they wanted to be able to sell their milk raw. Okay. The current rules are that the milk has to be pasteurized and have went through some sort of a process. And it was these farmers' positions that they didn't want to do that. They had clientele that wanted to drink the raw milk, and they wanted to be able to sell that. And it was a big issue at the time. And the Conservatives, there was one particular MPP who was out there on the front lines holding protests with these farmers and drinking raw milk on the front lawns of Queen's Park. And that was the one that stuck out in my mind. I was like, this sounds like a ridiculous thing. If they've got people who want to buy raw milk, why aren't they allowed to sell them that raw milk? Why does there have to be this kind of, rules and restrictions that kind of get in the way of that whole transaction? And that was the one that, if you had to ask me right now, that stuck out, that's the one.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of out of left field, but it makes sense in the end, because it was such a practical sort of stance to take. And I mean, as I've gotten older, I can really relate more to that perspective as well. It's, there's adults that have made their decisions, and, it's not necessarily up to mommy and daddy, the government, to tell you everything you can and can't do at a certain point, right?
100%.
It takes away people's individuality. And for those that can make the wise decisions tend to get limited over time in aggregate if they're not allowed to make their own decisions. So I guess maybe I didn't appreciate that as much until I've gotten older, but now I can definitely see both sides here. So I remember around that time as well. I'm not sure if this played into your sort of political leanings or not, or if it was just after the fact that you kind of enjoyed the philosophy behind it. But I remember you talking a lot about Ayn Rand when we were younger, which was also really weird because those are the books, like the Fountainhead is one of the longest books in English literature, right? And most kids aren't reading that. And if they do, it's like to prove a point that they could read something large or something like that. But for you, you read it, you internalized it, and like, I don't know, it seemed to resonate with you in some way. Would that be fair to say?
I think lots of kids who are, figuring out they're conservatives like to go and read Ayn Rand. I certainly did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Partly, I'm sure, is to, as you said, show that I could read a really big book and sound smart talking about it. But there's lots of ideas within that were certainly appealing to me at that age. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I've heard some people talk about Ayn Rand more recently as well. Like I'm not familiar really with her philosophies, but I think it does relate to individual choice a lot as well, right?
She's certainly kind of on the more abstract realm of kind of political philosophy, where it's government shouldn't really exist at all. It's kind of like a completely laissez-faire, free market capitalist system.
I see. Mm-hmm.
I honestly haven't picked up one of her books probably since high school, but maybe this old trip down memory lane will encourage me to open one up again.
Yeah. Well, I just find it funny how we kind of go in cycles of sort of the social and political issues that we get all hung up on, and I think we're in another cycle that we had around 30 years ago, and we're going through it again, where things are very polarized right now, and there's some sort of what used to be called common sense down the middle that people are starting to feel alienated from. I know, at least for myself. So I feel like she'll continue to be discussed, just from having that different perspective, because it's totally against, I guess, what the extreme left wing is parroting these days, which is a lot of groupthink and not questioning, I guess, the group consensus, things like that. Okay. So, all right. So that puts you around middle school. You became a conservative. You started high school together. What were you doing in high school surrounding politics? Were you kind of just waiting till you got out to university, or were you volunteering anywhere, keeping your eyes on any issues, things like that?
No, I like pretty much immediately after that legislative page program, I immediately was hooked on politics, as I said. So the day I turned 14, which is kind of the minimum age you can be to be a party member, I bought my first party membership in the Ontario PC Party and the Conservative Party of Canada. Worked on my first campaign as a 14-year-old, putting together lawn signs and knocking on doors. That would have been, I think, the 2007 election campaign in Ontario.
Okay.
And
who was running there?
So that would have been the leader of the Ontario PC Party at the time would have been John Tory.
John Tory. Okay.
People remember they refer to it as the faith-based schools campaign.
Okay.
So
I don't remember it.
No, it was an interesting campaign. So he had promised to, how Ontario funds a separate, they've got a public school board and a Catholic school board.
Right. Yeah.
He promised to open up public school funding to a bunch of other faith-based schools as well.
Right.
And
Okay.
it's now kind of become a colloquial in Canadian politics for a terrible policy announcement that completely sunk a campaign.
Yeah.
So
Damn.
he did not win.
Okay.
But I was 14 at the time, and I was helping out and volunteering, and I think I've at least knocked on a door in every single election campaign, provincially or federally. So.
Wow. Just a model conservative.
There for them.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, now that you're saying it, I mean, I didn't realize that was when the decision was made. I just remember people talking about basically Catholic schools had their own set of funding, and then they also received the public school funds. So then they were just better funded than all the public schools. And then it was because they were teaching faith-based curriculum, I guess.
Yeah, it actually goes back to pretty much Confederation, that there would be a separate school board funded for both public and Catholic education.
Is that's like constitutional or something? Like not mixing religion with
education? I'm pretty sure it's enshrined in some sort of act somewhere that's considered the Constitution. Yes.
Wow. So, like, were you aware of these decisions being made and the weight they carried at that age, or you were kind of just wanted to help out?
At that point in time, a conservative could have said anything, and I probably would have been on the sidelines cheering it on. Right? And
I see.
I was in the back of the campaign office, sticking those little metal things into the bottom of election signs, and putting flyers in envelopes. I wasn't, dealing with the weight of policy announcements and how they're communicated or anything like that. So at the time, I thought everything that was happening around me was the coolest thing in the world.
Hey, and could very well have been.
Yeah.
Were there any other kids like your age doing the same thing, or you were the one?
No, there's every political party for the most part in Canada has like a youth wing. I wasn't really involved. We refer to them as tiny Tories in the Conservative Party.
Okay.
I didn't really get involved with the tiny Tories per se until university, but there were kids just like me, I'm sure, all across the province who were also volunteering on campaigns at age 14 rather than, playing basketball or road hockey.
Yeah, I was playing basketball for sure at that time. Yeah. Okay. I could just picture it like, you can see the TV shows in America or even documentaries on elections. The scale is so enormous, but it's well documented. So you can start to see behind the scenes where they film the staffers and the youth and stuff. And really, it seems like that's the heart of the campaign. It's those staffers, the volunteers are really where you get the manpower. So it really takes an army to get these elections cycles through. Was there sort of like a purpose that was articulated to the young volunteers and staffers when you joined, or it was sort of there's a bunch of things going on, help where you can, or was there like an on purpose sort of galvanizing of the spirit?
Yeah, like every like I volunteered on a local campaign, so that's like at the riding level. I'm sure everybody's experiences are a bit different at the riding level, but it really all depends on kind of the local campaign and who's involved and how much time they make for you. So I was lucky that there was people who found it, I guess, maybe entertaining that there was this 14-year-old boy, and at the time I probably looked like I was 11, hanging out in the back of the campaign office, and they certainly, they took time to answer whatever questions I had and kind of teach me the basics of how campaigns are run and how campaigns are won, and the lessons I learned on my very first campaign still hold true to campaigns today. So. I was certainly lucky. It all depends on who's involved at the local level and the interest that they take in the youth, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they had a good idea there to inspire that next generation. Just take a little bit of time out of their day and hopefully it'd pay off for the party later on in some small
But
way.
I was, of course, also a special case there, Matt. So.
Oh, I know. You're
I'm just
so gung
joking.
ho. It would have been
I'm
tough
just joshing.
to ignore it. But have you had an opportunity now, sort of from the other perspective, to develop that young talent or the young interest? Have you interfaced with young volunteers in a similar way?
Well, I haven't been the last kind of 3 election campaigns that I worked on were all from the central campaign rather than the local campaign. So that's when I'm, running out of the main kind of campaign office on a communications side of things. So I in my most recent capacities on campaigns haven't really had any involvement with youth in politics or anything like that. But there are lots of good people out there that do work hard to grow the youth presence of the Conservative Party, because we really need it.
Yeah. You say you really need it. Is that like lately or just in general? It's
just general. As you said, I think earlier, it's strange for young people to be conservatives. There's there's an old quote that if you're not a socialist in your 20s, you don't have a heart, but if you're not a conservative in your 40s, you don't have a brain. So I think it's been a long-standing problem going back decades that the Conservative Party hasn't done as well appealing to the youth as the other political parties in Canada. Yeah.
Do you think that's generalized everywhere? Like, would it be the same in the U.S., for instance?
I would imagine. I know that the Republicans in the States invest a lot of money developing their kind of campus college Republican networks. So they would certainly probably have stronger kind of a campus movement than the Conservative Party in Canada. But I think generally speaking, if you look at kind of the polling numbers, Democrats still typically win the youth vote by very large margins.
Yeah. I feel like there's a question in there I want to get at, related to sort of the psychology of political leanings, because there's a small subset, I guess, that find their party young and stick to it and stick through all of the elections to that party.
But small subset would be very small.
Yeah. But like you said, generally people start off left and move right as they get older. What are some of the factors, do you think, that lead to that sort of transition over time?
I think the biggest one is just as you get older and you get more independent and you kind of work your way up through your kind of professional career, you start to, at least on the fiscal side of things, realize maybe I don't like the government taking massive taxes out of my paycheck every single month. They're looking at what the government's spending it on and seeing, is this really necessary? Do we need all of this big social programming? So I think it's just kind of the nature of how people develop. They get young families and their priorities change significantly from what their priorities might have been when they were in their early 20s. It's just, I think, it's all cyclical.
Yeah. And is there a subset that then escapes back and turns liberal again as they get older?
I think it varies. I don't think it's safe to generalize it too much, but generally speaking, the Conservative Party traditionally does well with senior citizens as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Generally, kind of the older you get, the more conservative you tend to become.
And so would you say that it's unwise to be a liberal then? That you just don't have the full information?
Let's go with that.
I'm just asking because, it's, people could just be flippant and say whatever to rile up whatever side. But I can't help but find myself leaning right now as I've gotten older. And especially the last few years where I've seen that sort of the compassionate aspect of the liberals has been hijacked. And it's sort of been pulled to its extreme where you have to be compassionate with no sort of questioning. And that just sounds really unwise and irresponsible to me. And I've kind of seen evidence in both Canada and the US of sort of the liberal, I think it's mostly from the social aspect, socially liberal or progressive has gone really out there of that it's sort of lost connection to the policies that ground like a everyday person in their reality. So there's a lot of fight and talk over aspects of life that are really small to most people. It's taking up all the time and energy of these political parties, and it's really hurting the average person. It seems to me like it's kind of taking circumstances that have problems but are okay for now, that are moving in the right direction, and just qualifying it that moment in time that it's not good enough. And so it needs to be burned down to the ground or someone needs to be fired, things like that. And I found it really odd how extreme the left has gotten recently, because I don't think it was like that up until recently, since I was a kid. I think the liberals generally, sure, seemed to be more like socially compassionate, but there wasn't this extremism related to it. It wasn't bashing conservatives for the fact of being conservative. It was still trying to take the stance of holding that responsible ground for the socially conscious, but understanding people can have their other points of view, and that's okay. But now it's not okay for some reason.
Yeah, no, there's certainly this new kind of tendency of the woke, I guess, this woke mob who, if you don't use our language and agree with every opinion we have, then you are this part of this other evil group of whether it's they throw around language like racist and transphobe or homophobe or all sorts of phobes.
Yeah.
That certainly seems to be a new kind of concerning trend, I think, that we're seeing in more of the left-wing movement and left-wing political parties across the world.
Mm-hmm. And, is that a recent thing? Because I don't know the history really, but I guess the only extreme version I can think of is when communism has arisen. But I'm wondering if there's sort of examples of sort of the left-leaning political parties in some point historically getting more aggressive in sort of their extremism.
Well, I think the wokeness that's kind of dominating the new kind of political discourse on the left has always existed, right? For centuries, there's always kind of been that fringe kind of left wing. Just as there's fringe pockets of the right, there's fringe pockets of the left. What's kind of new is we're seeing now political parties completely adopt those formerly fringe kind of ideas as the new status quo talking point of the political party. And that's when it gets concerning, right?
Yeah.
So that's certainly, at least in the Western world, a very new thing, new trend.
Well, what would cause a whole party to just adopt the fringe? Because it shouldn't be the largest base in their party, right? To me, it doesn't even make
it's
logical sense.
The news cycle has changed a lot in the last decades. It used to be you get your news from the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN. Now people get their news from Facebook, Twitter, TikTok even.
Oh, man.
So, the news cycle has changed a lot. That's elevated some of these voices and given them more prominence. It's happening on the right too, right? Like, if you asked Republican probably strategists 15 years ago if anybody like a Donald Trump would be elected as the Republican presidential candidate, they would have laughed in your face. But,
right.
He kind of was able to capitalize on the same types of things where his Twitter feed was able to, one, completely distract the 24-hour cable news channel, while also at the same time directly communicating to voters. So that's a whole new kind of set of things that new set of communication tools that people have used to kind of take those ideas directly to people.
Yeah. I remember talking to you when Donald Trump got elected, and I remember I had heard that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had hired a bunch of Silicon Valley people to do his social media strategy. And it seemed like the Democrats just didn't take it seriously. And to me, that was like the most naive perspective you could take. It was sort of like the old heads saying like, this new thing, we know what it is. It's can't compete with us.
Yeah, the United States is a bit different than Canada in that perspective, in the sense of what political parties can use, can do with data. In the United States, it's pretty much open season. They know everything there is to know about voters and are able to highly target them with very unique and particular messages that nobody else is seeing. Canada has stricter kind of election rules that prohibit that, where you're not allowed to, for example, buy data from other kind of data mining sources. Okay. But Trump was certainly the first one. Trump took it to the next level. I think Obama was probably the first one to really, truly revolutionize the use of digital in election campaigning. But Trump definitely took it to the next level, as well as we saw it with Brexit as well in the UK.
Right. Yeah. It was sort of the boisterous anti-establishment person that tells it how it is that really made waves on social media, which it makes sense to me if you're saying like the medium has certain properties, like it's like intensity is what's being pushed. And so if you take an extreme stance, especially if you take an extreme stance, regardless of what the issue is and who you're talking to, it keeps ramping up on the feed. So you're always at the top of people's minds, basically, right?
But 10, 15 years ago, you certainly would have heard a Republican strategist on CNN, but right beside them would have been a Democratic strategist, and you would have heard, both sides. Today, the algorithms and everything that you're seeing on your smartphone is completely specifically tailored to what you like. Right. So you are only seeing the news that you want to see, and it certainly builds up. I guess kind of the more extreme sides of things, and it's being the political parties have certainly taken advantage of that and weaponized it, because at the end of the day, it's emotion that drives people to the polls and wants them to vote, right? Anger is a strong motivator.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just the reality of psychology, I guess.
Yeah. And I'd like to probe that a little further if we can. This isn't going away anytime soon, right? Like you said, TikTok is now emerging. There's whole generations of people that are now of voting age that consume all of their news from social media applications that are siloed, that are full of like confirmation bias. So you're only listening to the sources that parrot your particular point of view. And I've started to see some ways of trying to get around it. I think the people that just in general are wary of of having biases and how that can affect them negatively, become aware of how it plays in the political realm. So there's like an app I've seen lately called Ground News. I think it's American, but it basically categorizes each news story based on if it's left or right leaning, and then it can bring up like a tally, and so like it can look at your Twitter feed, let's say, and it can see like all the people that influence you and their political leanings, and then it can give you like your diet, your political diet. And so I did that, and this was after like I knowingly curated my feed because I was seeing like crazy left people saying ridiculous shit that wasn't attached to reality. And I was like, I'm going to follow them because I don't know what else they're parroting. And it seems like there's 1,000 other people that agree with them. So I should probably keep an eye on this. I feel like most people don't do that, but that's exactly how I think. And then when I did that ground news analysis, I was like right down the middle. So that's where I would hope to be, because if I don't know what sort of the opposite perspective to mine is, I don't know where the world's going, basically. Like I like to interact with everyone, especially if I want to do business or science. It's agnostic to who the person is. I got to know all sides, basically, right? Like everyone's human, everyone's entitled to their opinions. And for me, I'd rather everyone can, generally live how they'd like to, but when we live together, we have to make compromises, and that's fair. But I never agree with just saying that, that person disagrees with me on one issue, they're banished to the other side of the continent or something. Like, do you see of ways to mitigate this? Like, is it something that we have to make kids aware of young in school or something? Or
I think one, I think social media companies have correctly probably identified this as a problem. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them are proactively taking steps to kind of try and fix their own internal systems. Mm-hmm. Largely because they realize that if they don't, governments will go out of their way to try and regulate them substantially. Yeah. So it's partially out of their kind of self-interest in the fact that they don't want to be regulated more than they already are, or at all. And then secondly, there's a lot of negative coverage that's come out in the past kind of 4 years about some of the practices of these social media companies. Yeah. Specifically Facebook, right?
Yeah. Mark Zuckerberg is always sweating in front of the
courts these days. Yeah. For public relations reasons as well, I think they are proactively taking, their own internal steps. Beyond that, I don't pretend to have any better answers than that. I'm sure there's probably more we could do at the schooling level. You're probably right to teach our youth about the importances of looking at things from both sides of an issue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I don't really have anything beyond that at this point in time. I'd have to put some more thought into it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it lately because, again, this isn't going away. It's going to get more severe over time. I'm sure there's going to be new social media platforms that pop up too that have their own issues. And, it just seems that it's younger and younger kids are like internet native and have a device in hand, younger and younger. So it seems really important to me to come up with ways to sort of beat them to the punch and sort of give them tools to gauge the sort of information that's coming in and discriminate between good sources of information and poor sources of information, identify where biases could lie, and trying to do multifaceted research, for lack of a better term, to pull out what could be the different perspectives and then find what the center is, find what remains true in all cases. Like I can remember probably one of the most useful assignments I've ever done was in the congregated enrichment class in grade 7 or 8. But it was, our teacher was very concerned about the internet, as she should have been, and was realizing that, you know, it's open season. People can say whatever they want on the web. There weren't really well-respected sources on the web yet at that time. And so it was kind of flattened, like, you know, a respectable person that's well thought through, that tries to tamper their biases, is in line with some blog of a person just spouting whatever vitriol they feel like shouting that day. And it was up to the reader or the consumer to decide how to interpret that. And I think people can get carried away really quick and not realize subconsciously they're being pulled in a particular direction. But I remember this assignment we had was specifically to look at, it was a few websites, and to try and identify who owned the website, when it started, and if there was like some sort of like underlying fishiness going on that you could pull out. And I don't remember what all the different websites there were to look at. I remember one specific example, and it was a website called Dog Island. And this was a website advertising like a sleepaway camp for dogs. Or basically like my family, we had a dog that barked a lot. Our neighbors didn't like it. They called the pound too many times. So we had to give him up for adoption because it just was not well behaved. So in cases like that, they're advertising it like, you know, you love your dog, you want them to have a good life, so send them off to Dog Island. It was like, you know, an island off the coast of China or something like that was where they advertised it. And they had all these beautiful pictures and videos of dogs roaming around in fields, whatever. And you know, it was well put together, the website. Like, it's high quality images. There wasn't problems with grammar. You know, it looked like something that was professionally put together. And so that can kind of give this subconscious impression of it's trustworthy. But our teacher gave us these tools to sort of get at that, which is the Wayback Machine. So you can trace back what a website used to look like. And then there was another tool, I can't remember, but you could see sort of the information of that domain host. And that was just enough to show us that there was something fishy. And so it was that the Wayback Machine, if you go back to like the first iteration of the website, you can see like the framework of it, and it wasn't well put together. And the wording was, you could see it wasn't an English native speaker. Like there was issues in that. There's only like one picture as opposed to the whole site being of images trying to paint this beautiful story. And then when we could look at the domain name or the domain holder, it was this company, and it was a Chinese company, and you could look it up, and you look it up, and it's a meat packing factory. And so that was the assignment. It was just to look up what we could find the threads, and just document what we could, and then we take it up later. And so when she told us what the answers were to this, it was found that Dog Island is basically just a funnel for this Chinese meat company to take people's dog and make dog meat out of it. And we were like 13 years old hearing this, like, what? How could that be? How could someone do that? This is real? What? And the moral of the story was, yeah, this is real. People do that. It may be rare, but now that it's on the internet, it's way more possible to do that than ever before. And her perspective was that the government or whoever is not going to keep up enough to tell you how you're supposed to consume your news or whatever. So it's up to you. Use your own opinion, your eyes, your ears, and, you know, that brain, and see if it passes the eye test.
I'd actually be very curious in looking at the data on this, but I would bet that most youth are, since they've grown up online, as you said, are actually way more literate to those types of things than the older people who are more new, I guess, to the World Wide Web.
Like my grandma.
Social media, right? Like if you think about, you know, the problems that people love to identify with the internet, like, the example, like the spreading of fake news. Who's more likely to be susceptible to hitting share on a Facebook post of a fake news article? I haven't looked into this. I would wager it's the older people than the younger.
It's my grandma for sure. She is so. It's bad. Like, I can see she's in it. She's like in that cesspool of her own, like, it's almost like her own worst aspects just funneled back into each other. And she's in this cycle of just like really far right, conspiracy laden, inaccurate information. And like all the videos on her feed and thing, it's like, I take one glance at it, I'm like, oh, this is a farce. They're trying to pull you in or lie to you. Like, that's the kind of stuff I just scroll past. It doesn't even register to me. And she's like in it, like this is a real thing. It's well produced or whatever. People put time into it. And to her, it's like people could only put together a video that had images and a story and, good speak or whatever if it was like CNN. So it must be trustworthy if it's a packaged piece of content. No matter how much we say it, it doesn't register that, no, like anyone on their phone can make any piece of content, and it's basically on par with whatever's out there. Once it's on the internet, it's able to be consumed.
Nope, 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I guess we can't do like a grandma boot camp of internet literacy, but we'll see if the kids can fend for themselves or not. I feel like they do handle it better, but I think just human nature, right? Like these companies and these algorithms are designed to get under the subconscious of human psychology. So you really have to know what you're looking for, I think, to avoid being sucked in.
Yeah, no, it's certainly one of the bigger issues of our time. I think that a lot of people are thinking about this type of thing. I don't know if anybody's come up with a workaround or a solution yet, but it's a debate that I think we're just seeing the beginning of. I think that we'll hear a lot more about this in the next decade. What to do about the internet.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings up what I've seen in the news recently in Canada, which is Bill C-10. I don't know if you've been involved following that at all, but to me, I don't know the details really, but it seems to me that Canada is trying to pass a bill that extends the jurisdiction of the CRTC. So, what would that be? I can't remember what it'd be in Canada, but it's like the radio and telecommunications regulatory body. Yeah. So expand their jurisdiction to social media, so that they can limit like a certain types of posts. I can't remember what the details were.
Yeah. So I mean, the bill's obviously a big bill that, it's trying to deal with a bunch of different things at the same time. Mm-hmm. So one, it's trying to deal with a lot of the stuff that other countries around the world are trying to deal with, which is, how to stop the spread of fake information, how to deal with the transmission of conspiracy theories and hate speech online. So that's something that I think a lot of countries around the world are dealing with. Right. And then the second component of it is Canada's got, we're always very proud of our CanCon rules. In Canada, we've got, rules that anything on the radio or on cable TV, a certain percentage of that has to be Canadian produced content.
A large percentage.
I
remember because I worked at the campus radio station and it surprised me. I couldn't play the rap music I wanted.
The idea behind those rules are that we're very close, obviously share a large border with the United States. Mm-hmm. And you don't want American cultural content coming in and washing out everything that makes kind of Canada unique per se. And these types of rules are incredibly popular in Quebec. Because Quebec has their own unique culture and their own unique. They're very proud of their French language. So that's the second thing that they're trying to do with this legislation is to, how do we continue to ensure that there's an adequate amount of Canadian content out there on the Netflixes and the Spotifys and YouTubes and whatnot. So they introduced this bill that was supposed to deal with all of that, and then in committee, there had previously been a part of the bill that specifically said, this does not impact user-generated content.
Okay.
And a Liberal MP amended the bill to remove this section. And that's where everybody all of a sudden, almost unanimously, completely lost their mind. Is, the narrative started to become like, are they going to regulate my cat videos?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a completely fair point.
Right.
At what point does the content that's being uploaded to these sites become user generated? I mean,
right.
What point does it become kind of subject to these CanCon rules? And what point does it not? And then what are all of the other kind of slippery slope parts that come out of that? Is there going to be some, faceless, nameless bureaucrat sitting in an office in Ottawa who's going through every single YouTube upload and deciding whether it's, it meets the government of the day's ethical standards for what Canadians are allowed to view? So it's a completely ridiculous bill. I think the government didn't intend. It's kind of gotten a little bit out of control and spiraled faster than the government could control it. They've clearly got a very radical minister who's responsible for this. I don't think that the bill will be able to be passed in its current iteration.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good. Because it made news in the U.S. and that doesn't happen very often. Like in Canada, it was pretty much Rob Ford doing crack cocaine, Doug Ford increasing police powers, and this, right? And two of the three are in the last year. So it's.
I know it's a big story, and listen, every country around the world is trying to figure out, as we discussed, what the heck to do with the internet.
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably, lots of good ideas that are coming from the left and lots of good ideas that are coming from the right. But what the government was trying to do to bring YouTube and Spotify and Netflix and to treat them like broadcasters, like AM, FM radio and cable TV news, ridiculous. Anybody who knows the internet knows that that'll never work. It's just, laws being passed about the internet by people who don't seem to actually understand what the internet is.
Yeah, that's a big problem. And I think that's a much larger issue. I think there's a generational misunderstanding or patronizing, or how is it? It's almost like, don't worry. We know best. It'll work. We've been here before. It's fine. But it's not. I feel like there's a certain set of leaders or people in positions of authority that are older now. I would say boomers that may have overstayed their welcome, but have been so used to doing things in such a prescribed manner for decades that they can't even see that something new is happening that needs to be addressed in a different way. And I think that's pervasive. I don't think that's amongst politicians only or, legislators, whatever it is. I think academia, it's a gigantic problem. I really felt that at the end of my grad school teaching. It was just certain discoveries are just happening so fast and in disparate fields, but they relate to one another. And people that have done things a certain way for so long aren't used to navigating a topology that's ever changing. And I think that's sort of a concept we need to prepare for in the next iterations of these institutions, because what we have just won't do.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the areas where it kind of exemplified where my new centrist right perspective is going. It's just like it seems again it was sort of a liberal leaning minister that was being irresponsible and not really thinking through the full severity of their actions or the decisions. And again, whenever I see someone just say, "Oh, it's okay," or "Trust me," or whatever, that's exactly the time not to. And you know, I'm not that old yet. I'm 28 now. But I'm finding myself having to put my neck out and really be confrontational with people that are like much my elder or superior. In many cases, to say like, I'm sorry, but like, it's not good enough. It's not going to cut it. And you know, you might think I'm just exaggerating, but I still have to act in what I see. Like, I think our generation has knowledge that people older than us don't. I think that's really strange. I think it's our responsibility to educate those people and to make these decisions. So I almost feel like our generation has to grow up fast, really fast right now, because we're sort of that bridge between the boomers who still don't really get what the internet is. But, you know, we were non-internet native and then we adopted the internet. And then we have to translate that way of life to the internet native kids in Gen Z who seem to perhaps not have solid footing, and no one's really giving them solid information. So they get pulled in all different directions. I'm not sure how to fix that, but to me, it seems like
we got to get you to run for office there.
Well, you know, for me, it starts from like personal responsibility. If I see something, say something, and then try and have like all of the people I associate with hopefully adopt a similar stance and then build out from there. That's the only way I can see it happening. But I feel like there needs to be a lot of sort of grassroots adoption of responsibility and action happening, especially from our millennial folk these days. So I'm glad that you're in there and being involved in politics as we speak, to at least bring that perspective, even if it is leaning conservative most of the time, but from the younger generation. So kudos. So you're talking about in high school, you're starting to get involved with the local conservative party. I remember, we don't really have to talk about it too much, but I just want to use this as a stepping stone onto what university you went to, why, and what program. But I do remember sort of at the end of our high school, we had a very eccentric teacher in geography that gave us an assignment that was basically, gave us like a map of territory where there's a bunch of different cultural tribes living. These were abstract names and territories. It was just, you know, the Widgets and the Squeeze. Those are two tribes or whatever. I'm just making it up. But the point was that you had to come up with the best plan you could on how these different tribes could live peacefully amongst each other, spread across this geographical landscape. And I think it was like a relatively long assignment, but to me, that was one of the best exercises I've had ever. The thought process that went through it. And I can't remember how it happened, but we ended up partnering on it. I don't know if we chose that or if our teacher chose it, but I remember it worked really well because we took opposing points of view. You know, that was high school, so I was still very liberal at that point. And you were standing your ground from the conservative side. And, you know, generally we agree on the mid parts, like the functional of being a human, you know, let people generally do what they want, but people need social protection, whatever. But every issue that came up, we'd battle it out, even if it was small. But because we were coming from opposite perspectives, where we landed in the end, respectfully, seemed to be like right down the middle and what it needed to be. And I think we ended up getting the highest mark on that class. And that, to me, that was it was almost like captured in a capsule. Like time stood still for a little while we were working on it. It was just so intense for me, but I loved it.
I hate to break it to you, but I don't remember this assignment in the slightest.
You don't remember it at all?
I'm glad you had a positive experience.
Well, yeah, I might interview one of our other classmates from that, because I've talked to him recently and he remembers it. Jared Windover. But he's now a programmer. He works at Square. But he said that was his most valuable learning experience in high school as well, but from a different perspective. I think he got second highest, but his strategy was to create an algorithmic approach. And he couldn't quite do it in high school. He didn't have the tools, but he like went into a degree in mathematics that was centered around these algorithms that could, take input of a whole bunch of variables and then come up with like a structured solution. So it's just interesting that it kind of inspired that. But it's interesting you don't remember, because we did battle it out. I remember you wrote it up in the end.
I was a bit of a contrarian back in the day, so I would have debated you on probably any subject.
Yeah, but I just remember like warning you ahead of time, like I'm gonna disagree with you, and I hope that's okay. And you're like, yeah, sure, whatever. But we went at it, and I think got a little heated at times, but both us understanding that we were trying to be in contrast to the others and meet in the middle. So whether you remember it or not, for me, it was a huge learning experience. But what I took away from it was that it's always valuable to engage with a different perspective, because you're probably going to take something away from it. And that's what really is a shame that I'm seeing with this cancel culture. It's not giving people the opportunity to grow, to learn from each other. Because that's what happens when you disagree with someone. In my opinion, what you should do is try to figure out why you disagree, because there's probably a reason. And when you figure out why that is, you'll both learn from it. You'll both learn something about yourselves. So I've always tried to take that perspective, but you really helped me with that, because I guess you probably had the most differing views from me at the time, and that was exactly the person I wanted to engage with, especially because you're so brilliant and respectful as well.
I appreciate that.
So around that time, you're a contrarian, but you still had to get a degree if they were going to let you work in politics, right? So how are you thinking about applying to university? Were you taking a political stance? Where'd you go? What program? That kind of thing.
So I was, obviously, as we went over, was politics obsessed. Knew I wanted to work in politics.
Yeah.
Didn't really know what working in politics probably meant, but I knew I wanted to work in politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I obviously applied for a lot of political science programs.
Mm-hmm.
But I also at the same time applied for a degree in international development at the University of Waterloo.
Okay.
I ended up actually at the end of the day going into international development at the University of Waterloo. And what interested me about the program was it was very multidisciplinary.
Mm-hmm.
So it was based out of the Faculty of Environment. So you did environmental courses, obviously, geography courses, but you also were required to take economics, and you were required to take history, and you were required to take some more practical courses like bookkeeping and accounting. And so it was very multidisciplinary, and I figured, I don't know if working in politics requires a political science degree. I don't think it does.
Yeah.
I bet there's a lot of people applying to work in politics who have political science degrees. So I'll try something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So the other cool thing about the degree was it was 3 years in class education.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth year was kind of like a bit of a co-op term where you worked abroad.
Right. Yeah.
So I ended up in my fourth year going to Vietnam, living in Vietnam for 9 months, and working for a local, like, non-governmental organization doing development work in Vietnam. So it got me out of the lecture halls, which I also found very enticing for a degree as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a crazy program. I remember when you went off. I don't know if I could have done it at that age. Like, to go somewhere so foreign and like a underdeveloped area, not know how to speak the language, with very few people that you know, and just,
last it out. Like,
no, it was certainly a little bit scary at the time, but it was a great experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. It really teaches you how to adapt and get out of your comfort zone. So awesome experience.
Yeah. Like, is there any one specific thing you could point to that the Vietnamese where you were locally just differed from Canadians? Like some sort of perspective or problem, I guess, that they had to wrestle with that we just don't even think of. Something where you could learn from.
It's hard for me to pick one thing. Everything is different. Like culturally, we are not the same in any way, shape, or form. Everything from, your commute to work is different to the structure of your work day is different.
Okay.
I'm still amazed. They have their lunch and then they have like a 2-hour nap after the lunch.
They do the siesta.
In the office just naps. Everything from the sightseeing and the way that they showcase their history and their museums and such is different. Like there's not one thing that I could probably hone in on and highlight as an example.
Do you think that what we do is better in those cases? Do we have a better workday structure? Do we have a better way of showcasing our history? Or is it just different? Could we learn from them in some ways?
Yeah, I'm not one to say anybody's, I guess, culture's better.
Right.
On the history side, I guess, this is an interesting enough little tidbit. Like, so in Hanoi, there's it's colloquially referred to as the Hanoi Hilton. You've probably heard about it. It's like where they kept the American prisoners of war during the Vietnamese War. John McCain famously stayed there.
Okay.
It is now turned into a museum. The first 3/4 of the museums doesn't mention at all the most famous probably component of the Hanoi Hilton, which is the American element.
Yeah.
The first 3/4 of it are all devoted to how the French pre-American Vietnam War used to treat the Vietnamese and how they used to keep them captive there. Mm-hmm. And then the last quarter of the museum is devoted to like pictures and photographs of how great they treated the American captives. That's just an interesting little, I guess, tidbit about how there's a difference between Western countries showcase their histories in museum format versus a communist country in Southeast Asia.
Right. And that kind of sounds like relating to the old adage, like the history is written by the winners, right? It's always going to be biased to whatever outcome the person writing it preferred. I'm wondering what it would look like if we could reconcile everyone's history books and find out what was the core truth and how different it was from what we think. But
I guess it comes down to whether you believe things are black and white or if you think things are a little bit gray and nuanced, right?
Right. Yeah, and for sure, I live in the nuance. That's where the magic happens. Black and white is just where we push it out, in the moment to serve a point of view, I guess. Yeah, that's interesting. I have to travel more because I know a little bit about European history, but Asian, I have no idea. I know a little bit about like Iranian and Persian history through my dad, which is always really interesting because they're so ancient, right? Like what he learned in history class was what happened like 4,000 years ago, because Persia was a thing and had a king and a very structured society, right? Whereas in Canada, I remember learning a lot about like indigenous people and the types of huts they had, and like the framework of the stories that they told each other, and like the specific flora or fauna that grew in that region. And to me, it was like very into like the minutia of describing a very shallow amount of history. And so, like, and it just, no offense, but just didn't really captivate me. What's captivating to me is to hear, the Persian Empire conquered Egypt, and, this King Cyrus was the first to allow anyone to practice their religion, but under a common monarch. And that led to the Cyrus cylinder, a mixing of cultures that the world had never seen, and, just amazing scientific and philosophical flourishing in the nations that came out of it. So that, it's useful to have historical perspective worldwide, because I think, at least in Canada, it felt like to me that, history was focused on Canadians, and they just weren't a part of world history for, the most of our human history.
Don't sleep on Canadian history, though. There's lots of really interesting stuff in the Canadian history textbooks, though.
Yeah? Like what?
Vimy Ridge, Normandy.
Yeah, that's a world war.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's got spots for that.
The settling of North America.
Sure.
The birth of the greatest democracy in the world, Canada. Look at me, I'm just bullish on Canada, all right? I'm just bullish on Canada.
That's good. Again, a perspective I don't know if I share completely. I love Canada, great place, but there's some real limitations that seem to not jive with my personality. Big reason why I'm here. But we can agree to disagree.
Some aspects.
Yeah, so you're finishing up your program in international development. By the end of it, were you thinking you had a shot at a political career? Had you been working at a more, I don't know how to say it, like mature level in the political parties at all during college?
So I was in, so it was my last year of university, fourth year. I'm in Vietnam. I was in a hotel room in Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon, New Year's Eve, Vietnamese New Year's Eve. And I did an interview from Vietnam over Skype for an internship at Queen's Park.
Wow. Okay.
Lucky enough, I got hired from that interview, probably because they just thought it was bizarre they were interviewing a guy in Vietnam. But either way,
that'll make you stand out.
I was lucky enough to be one of the select few who was hired for this internship. Very few were hired that year because there was kind of like a bit of a leadership change underway. And the rest, they say, is history. I don't know what I would be doing if I probably didn't get that internship.
True.
My career trajectory might have looked very different, but I was extremely fortunate, and pretty much a week. I landed, I think, in Canada back in Canada on like a Friday, and I was working at Queen's Park that next Monday.
Wow. I didn't even realize it was that quick of a turnaround.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was doing my own thing, head in the clouds. Yeah. Okay. So are you still good on time for a bit?
Yeah, I've got nothing but time over here. If you want to keep talking about how great I am, I'm happy to share.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll continue to say that you're one of my brightest friends, Simon, and it always brings me great joy to hear your perspectives, because I can't come up with them from within myself. So I need you so I can keep learning to grow. Starting at Queen's Park, what's that like? Like, are you bottom of the totem pole? Do you have to do everyone's bidding? Were there a select few people that saw something in you that let you have some independence? What was that like?
So obviously bottom of the totem pole, like I was expected to basically grab coffee if I was asked, right?
Yeah.
But everything in politics is like, obviously, work ethic and skill play a massive part, but timing's also a big component of it.
Yeah.
So I got hired, trying to make sure I've got my timelines right, but it must have been maybe 2 to 3 weeks, if I'm guessing, before a new leader was elected. So I technically started working at Queen's Park in the office of the interim leader of the party. It was a very, the interim leader of the party generally keeps a more bare bones kind of skeleton staff,
right?
So that they can let the new leader, whoever gets elected, the opportunity to kind of bring in their own people and shape the office, in the way that they prefer.
Right.
So very, tight, small staff that I kind of started under. Got to know them well. Because the staff was so small, I did get the opportunity pretty quickly to do some things that normal interns probably wouldn't have. Writing some speaking remarks that probably would have went to a more senior person previously. Issues notes that were probably a bit senior for what an intern typically would do. And I jumped at every opportunity I possibly could at that time, because I knew this is what I wanted to do. And, I was probably that annoying kid that was always like, do you have more work to do? Do you have more work to do?
Yeah.
But anything that was available to sink my teeth into, I did. And then the new leader was elected, and, lucky enough, he kept most of the old staff on. They continued to let me, develop my skills and stuff like that. And the rest is history. And I just kept working hard and putting everything I had into the work that I was afforded the opportunity to do. And I eventually was able to rise the ranks from there.
Yeah. So that was in the campaign that got Doug Ford elected to Premier of Ontario. Is that one?
So prior to Doug Ford getting elected Premier, I would have been at Queen's Park for about 3 years.
Okay.
And in those 3 years, I technically would have worked for 4 different Ontario PC party leaders.
Wow. I didn't realize it was
a bit of a tumultuous time.
Yeah, they weren't doing so well, huh?
Well, yeah, there was, I worked for the interim leader, then the new leader was elected, he resigned. There was another interim leader. There was this, a very rushed leadership process. Doug Ford was elected. I went and worked on Doug Ford's campaign. Then he went into the Premier's office. That was pretty much the Coles notes of the sequences of events.
Are you able to say why it was so tumultuous at the time?
Well, it was unprecedented. So we were up significantly in the polls in about January 2018.
Okay.
Our leader resigned. There was lots of reasons for that. We had probably the quickest leadership race in political party history in Canada. I haven't fact checked that, but I would imagine that it was pulled together very quickly. And then we had to get into, it takes planning an election campaign is years of work. And we had to pull together an election campaign apparatus in a few months.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a crazy time, but it was also a lot of fun and an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. So you were like thrown in the fire and it was sink or swim. But if you make it out, you're going to be so much more capable than when you started, right?
Yeah.
Which is what happened. You became a professional out of it, right? So can we talk about Doug Ford a little bit?
100%.
So for those that know, Doug Ford is from Ontario, in Toronto, the capital. And his brother, Rob Ford, was mayor prior to that. And made the news, I think worldwide, but it was crazy that it made news in the US that he was the famous crack smoking mayor of Canada, which was a crazy story. And he was in a downward spiral by that point. But that didn't get him kicked out of the mayor's office, did it? Right away?
Yeah, like he stayed on as mayor until after the 2014 election. But yeah, Toronto City Council at the time did vote to remove some of the authorities he had.
I see.
In the mayor's office. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just found it such a fascinating story because it seemed to me like he was just the most charismatic person, like in city council. And so he got elected because he was the most charismatic. And it seemed that he got along, at least early on when he wasn't spiraling, with all the staffers and people around. And so that kept up his popularity. It's just interesting that, he probably took it too far into his freedoms, but there's something there. There's something about him that was really alluring.
Well, yeah, he obviously will probably forever be known as the crack smoking mayor.
Right.
That's probably a simplistic kind of
for sure
analysis of him. So he represented Etobicoke. So for people, Etobicoke North. So for people who don't know Toronto very well, it's a suburban kind of part of the city. And he kind of made his original reputation on city council before he was mayor as the guy who, fought was the only guy on city council kind of voting against the awarding of new perks and luxuries for politicians. He has one very viral video that happened before he was mayor where he was, opened up his wallet and went through kind of all of the cards that councillors get with free zoo admission and free parking and free TTC. And he says, this is costing council kind of millions and millions of dollars. And I'm the only guy that's fighting against it. And then the second part that he was really well known for was he gave out his phone number to everybody.
Wow, that's so crazy.
So I never worked for Rob Ford. I only worked for his brother, but he gave out a cell phone number to anyone. And a lot of what a counselor does is very, constituency work focused, right? It's that people call up their counselor's office and they say, go fix, I've got, a pothole on my road. That's an issue, right? Or, the piping, the water in my Toronto community housing building is down. So, they typically with the other counselors, you'd call their office and, they'd probably add you to a list and they'd get to it in 2 weeks. And, the counselor would never show up and actually do the work himself. But with Rob Ford, you'd call his cell phone. He'd show up personally, probably dragging some city bureaucrat with him to the project and got it done. Yeah. And so he originally started doing it just kind of in the area of the city that he represented, but pretty soon, he started handing out his cell phone number to people outside of his kind of ward and ticked off every single councillor because he was starting to do their work, right? And that's kind of where he developed his reputation, and that's why people loved him, and that's kind of that momentum that kind of pushed him into the mayor's office, obviously amongst other things. And that's why a lot of people, despite the crack scandal that everybody talks about, they still love him to death because he was kind of the people's politician, is what they referred to him as. He wasn't a slick kind of usual politician who gave you talking points. He was straight up and told it like it was.
Yeah, it was kind of before his time, almost in some respects, right? A man of the people. He'll talk to you and he'll smoke crack with you. He'll do it all. But the only reason I bring that up is because the Ford family name sort of had some sort of momentum in the Toronto, Ontario area that Doug was able to capitalize on and then, carry it further. So yeah, I think I remember you were working for someone. Yeah, you were there. You were there when Doug got elected, and you weren't necessarily expecting him to win, right?
He wasn't. He wasn't the favorite.
It was 4 people ended up running for the leadership, and we always knew it was going to be a close race.
Okay,
and none of us who were kind of in the office left over knew whether any of us would be able to keep our jobs, right? Like new leader, they've got their own people.
Right.
So that was the biggest thing on everybody's mind was like, whoever wins, is it going to be like, are they going to keep me on? So it's, it's a very stressful time.
Yeah.
Specifically because you'd worked the last 3 years before that, all for the goal of winning the next election and hopefully working in government. Only for there to all of a sudden be all this craziness, and you're unsure about your future and if you'll even be able to be involved in the next campaign.
So you weren't really involved in him getting elected, right? You were just
I didn't work on his leadership campaign. We were kind of anybody who was in the independent leader's office had to be kind of neutral through that process.
I see. Yeah, that'd be really weird. You're just watching it play out. Kind of have to sit on your hands. Okay, so when did you get the news that you weren't indeed going to lose your job and that you could continue working on?
Yeah, well, as I said before, like planning an election campaign takes years worth of planning, and we only had a few months. So it happened very quickly. They just realized you've got, good people there who know the issues, know the files, have kind of lived and breathed everything Ontario politics for the last little while. And let's just keep moving forward with a lot of the same people. Like obviously new people were brought in, and you would have had new bosses and stuff like that. But there was the same core that I'd worked with before got to stick around, and we all got to work on the next campaign, and most of us ended up going into government as well.
Nice. So then how long were you working on the campaign until election? It was like 8 months or something?
So he would have been elected leader in March, and the election would have been in June. So that's 3 months.
Oh my goodness. That's ridiculous. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember it. I guess I didn't care enough. Wow, that is ridiculously quick. Okay, could you sort of maybe talk through a bit of what was happening in those 3 months? Like, who were you up against with the Liberals? What did you think your chances were? What was your strategy, if you can say?
Yeah, so we were running against, like, the Liberals were in government. The Liberals had been in government for 15 years, and they had, after those 15 years, they'd taken a few bruises, a few lumps along the way. And the premier at the time, her name was Kathleen Wynne, was like historically unpopular.
Right.
And we, for that entire kind of, prior to Doug Ford being elected, but like we had been leading in the polls, our party, for a very long time.
Is that because she's a woman? Because I heard people just don't like female politicians. They always pull lower.
People have written about that a lot. I don't necessarily buy it as much. I think it was just she had to wear the baggage of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
From her predecessor, and she made a lot of mistakes of her own along the way. People just, they were ready. It's the way, as we said, politics is cyclical. People were ready for a change, right?
Right.
People talk about change elections. It was a change election. They were ready for something new, and we had been leading, obviously, for like the couple of years leading up to the campaign. So halfway through the campaign, people kind of started saying, well, let's take a little peek at the NDP. Maybe I'll consider voting NDP. So we, had to change approaches a bit during the campaign to kind of change our attacks from the Liberals to the NDP. But for the most part, I don't think there was too many people out there that weren't expecting PCs or Doug Ford to win. Okay,
so you had momentum on your side, and you were just trying to ride the wave and not.
Yeah, I mean,
make any huge mistakes.
To say it's momentum, I don't know if that's. We just, people were ready for a new government, and we were the ones that I guess they looked to in that. There's lots of different reasons for that. Affordability was a big issue. Ontario had the highest hydro rates in North America, largely due to kind of messes that the Liberals had created over the past 15 years. We were the ones with the kind of strongest message on that. There was affordability was a big issue. There was a lot of like corruption scandals that had existed in the previous government. People generally trust conservatives more than other parties when it comes to cleaning up kind of ethics issues. So it was a change election, and the PCs were the ones who were able to capitalize on that. We were the ones that are able to capitalize on that.
Right. Okay. So you kind of had like a promotion though along that election cycle, didn't you? Like, were you? What was your title, I guess, during that?
During the campaign?
Yeah.
So going into the campaign, I was press secretary.
Okay.
In the campaign, titles weren't like they're less of a thing.
Okay.
But I handled a lot of media, which is something that I was doing before, and a lot of kind of rapid response kind of writing and research and stuff like that.
So is that like social media or responding to news outlets or
for the media?
Yeah.
That would have been like journalists and stuff like that.
Journalists. Okay.
But also I don't, campaigns are very all hands on deck. Everybody kind of chips in on everything. They call kind of the nerve system of the campaign a war room. You've probably heard that term before. So I would have been in the war room doing media, anything communications related, really.
Okay. So you were the silver tongue?
Silver tongue? I don't know if I've heard that one before.
It's just smooth talker.
Nobody's ever called me a smooth talker.
No? It's, I get that. I just know that because my dad's a used car salesman, right? So that's what people call him. Not necessarily in a good way, but there's useful aspects. But, okay. So you did your job, right? You got this guy elected. Change happened. But it was pretty soon after that you were making a change in your career as well, right? Or trying to. You didn't stay in the Ontario Parliament for all that.
So I worked for Doug Ford in his role as premier for about a year. I think a little bit more than a year, as his director of media relations.
Okay.
So my job was again dealing with reporters and the press, and responding to all of the stuff our opponents were saying in regards to issues and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So then after about a year there, I went and worked. I switched from Ontario politics to federal politics. I'd spent a good amount of time at Queen's Park. I was ready to try something new. So I went and worked, joined the federal conservative leader's office.
Right. And that was a big uphill battle, right? Because what was it? The Conservatives were taking a hit around that time federally. Is that true?
Well, it was a bit of a different situation in the sense that, like, for a lot of the time in my time in Ontario politics, we were winning, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We were leading in the polls. As we said, timing is a lot of it. Timing was good. Federally, Justin Trudeau had certainly taken a few. So Justin Trudeau is the prime minister, a few lumps, but he was still generally pretty popular, and he had a majority government. Majority governments generally are hard; they don't lose the first time around.
Yeah.
So I guess from that sense, it was a bit of a more of an uphill battle.
Like, what were you expecting to take it, or you just wanted to make your contribution and see if you could?
Was I expecting to take it? No.
Okay.
I don't.
You're reasonable.
No. Knew it was gonna be a challenge, but I certainly thought that we had a chance.
Yeah.
Don't want to say I thought it was hopeless and I was just going there for shits and giggles. But no, I knew it was going to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, we know how that played out. Justin stayed. He ended up with a minority government. Is that what happened?
Yeah. So we knocked the majority down to a minority. Got more votes. We got more votes than him.
Oh yeah.
The more people voted for the Conservative Party than the Liberal Party, but that's not the way the system works. So
Right, because NDP made a big splash that year, right?
well, we vote based off the government gets formed based off of how many members of parliament you elect rather than how many votes you get.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're saying the places where you got seats, you probably got a lot of votes. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you had more votes than seats proportionally or something like that, right?
I'm just trying to point out that it wasn't a complete loss, all right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So, like, once the results came in, did you stick around there, or you made your next transition pretty soon after that as well?
Election would have been in October, so I would have left five months after that. So I stuck around for a bit. You know, as with everything in politics, there's always lots of, you know, behind the scenes politicking and fighting and stuff, right? So, you know, there was a large debate within the party if the leader that I worked for should be the person who runs in the next election campaign. There's a lot of shenanigans that go along with that.
Yeah.
So I was around for kind of all of the shuffling behind the scenes on that, and in the end, the leader he made his own decision and said, "I'll step down." So once he did that, that was when I started kind of thinking about next steps.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, how did you find your experience? That's not what I want to ask. How is the environment? How are the people in the federal government different than provincial? Or were they not? Were they generally the same?
Well, I think a lot of the party politics side of things is a very small world, right? There are, you know, I know most people who have worked in conservative politics in this country over the last, 5 years or so, just because you kind of overlap and you just cross paths with them a lot. Yeah. So, the personalities, like at least internally, weren't, they're not that much different based off of the level of government. Big differences would be the issues you're dealing with are completely different, right? Provincial governments deal with their responsibilities are like healthcare, education, a lot of transportation stuff. Federally, those are stuff that touches people's day-to-day lives a lot. Everybody has kids that goes to school. Everybody knows somebody who's been through the healthcare system. Federally, the issues that you're talking about, there's still like lots of stuff that impacts people's day-to-day lives in terms of like taxes and services from government. But you're also talking about foreign affairs, and you're also talking about, as we went over, Bill C-10, and like the issue sets are just completely different. So that's, having spent 5 years or so immersing myself in Ontario political issues, I had to, acquaint myself with some new issues. The media cycle is very different in Ottawa. There's just a lot more reporters.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
The Queen's Park Press Gallery's a lot. It's probably, I would wager maybe 15 strong at this point in time. Been declining a lot over the last little bit. The Federal Gallery, you're dealing with over 100 reporters, right? And some of them only deal with specific, very technical issues. So that was a bit of a difference. Those are the two that immediately come to mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I wouldn't have even thought of that being the main difference, but
another interesting difference. Another interesting difference as well is just you're obviously 1 year in Toronto. Working in provincial politics, you're based in Toronto. Working in federal politics, you're based in Ottawa. The cities are just incredibly different. Like Toronto, you're in your little bubble when you're on the legislature. Okay. As soon as you step off the legislature, you're not in that bubble anymore. You're in, the biggest city in Canada. When you go to a restaurant or a bar after work, you're not bumping into other people who work in politics necessarily, or reporters, or bureaucrats or whatever. But in Ottawa, everybody is involved with the apparatuses of government. So as soon as you leave Parliament Hill and you go to a bar, you're surrounded by diplomats and you're surrounded by reporters and you're surrounded by bureaucrats, and it's very much like they describe it as they call it the Ottawa bubble, and it is like completely a bubble. Is like if you're in downtown Ottawa, you are not within 5 meters away from somebody who is important in a decision maker in some respect.
Yeah, like how did you feel about that? Did you prefer to be able to escape the bubble when you could, or they're just their own different beasts, or?
Yeah, they're just different. Every once in a while, you probably like to go to the bar and have a few too many cocktails and not have to worry if what you're saying is being overheard. But it's also cool to be at a restaurant in downtown Ottawa and look over your shoulder and see, oh, that's the finance minister over there, right? Like, that's the stuff that happens. They both got their moments.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and so once that all wrapped up, you got to more carve your own path, right? With this consulting agency. Could you say maybe what was the impetus for starting the firm or joining the firm, how that played out?
Yeah, so I as I said before, like the person who I was working for, the leader of the party at the time, had decided he was gonna step down. Unlike the previous leadership changes that I'd been involved with in the past, I knew that I was probably going to get shuffled out. I was, at that point in time, very senior within the office, and the senior positions are the ones that get shuffled out the most. You're not shuffling around the kind of more junior people. So I knew that, at the end of whenever the new leader was elected, that I would probably have to go find a new job anyway. An opportunity presented itself with people who I'd worked with Doug Ford, actually, previously. They were starting a firm. They asked me to be a part of it. It was kind of a cool opportunity to be a part of a business kind of from the ground floor.
Yeah.
Didn't know we would be building the business in the middle of a global pandemic, but that's kind of been a whole new fun challenge. But it was just the right opportunity at the right time. Politics, love it to death. Like working as a staffer, but it's long, hard hours. I was regularly in the office at 6 a.m. or 6:30 and answering emails at midnight. You always have to be tuned into what's happening. So it's nice to be able to sleep in a little bit longer and not have to, frantically respond to emails at 10:30 p.m. if they come in late at night, and not have to go on Twitter every single minute to see that if there's any breaking news that we need to respond to. So it's nice from that perspective to have a little bit of a break. Yeah.
Nice. So do you have something that you guys are building towards specifically, or you're sort of taking in the clientele that comes to you? Like, are you focused on campaigns, or what kind of issues do you tackle?
So I'd say a large portion of our clients are they come for government relations services. So they have problems with government that they need fixed, and we kind of help fix them.
So it's like corporations that come to you?
Yeah, a lot of corporations and stuff that, they've got, regulations that they want to see fixed, or they're looking for kind of government funding for a certain project they're working on, or the government's not letting them build something or whatnot, right? Like there's a whole host of things that they could be having issues with. But, our experience is one, we know how government works. We know how things kind of get pushed through the system, and how decisions get made, and how, you can kind of shape that process. And also we know the people who are making the decisions, right? Like we worked in the Doug Ford government, for example. Some of my coworkers have worked with, the people who work in Alberta or Saskatchewan or BC. So that's kind of the service offering we present.
Nice. Wow. So you cover Canada wide then?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. So do you think you'll be there for a while in this kind of capacity, or, if another election cycle comes through, you might hop on that wave?
I'm really happy where I am right now, so I don't see any changes anytime soon. Not saying I'd never go back into government, but I haven't been thinking about that at any time in the last little bit. So
Yeah. So does that mean you're less involved in sort of party politics? You're more on the sidelines, or you still have friends and things that you're dealing with?
Yeah, like I still stay on top of everything and talk to lots of people, and people will often call up and ask for advice and stuff like that. And I'm still a Conservative Party member, and I'm still going to help elect Conservative governments in provincially and federally. It's just less of the day-to-day involvement in kind of the operations of the party or the political office.
Yeah. Okay. So, sort of controversial question. Do you have any idea what was going on when Doug Ford decided to announce an expansion to police powers, basically to be able to stop anyone, just stop and frisk, essentially being allowed for what? Not wearing a mask or being out after a certain hour, something like that?
It was more for like outdoor gatherings. So obviously Ontario at that time was, I guess we still kind of are in the midst of like a third wave of the pandemic, as they're saying. And all of the advice that, I guess the government had been receiving, they're receiving advice from lots of different groups, lots of different doctors. There's hundreds of doctors out there who all have their kind of own opinion on what the best way to handle the pandemic is. And the advice that they would have been provided was, we need to limit mobility and keep people at home. I guess kind of the same advice that, the government's been dishing out since the beginning. So they issued a mandatory stay-at-home order. And then there was kind of, I think, pushback in the sense that, people were still gathering. And how do you enforce a mandatory stay-at-home order without, I guess, giving police additional authorities to be able to ask people questions about why they're leaving the house? So that was kind of, I think, the logic behind it. There was obviously an immediate backlash where people were like, hold up, we live in Ontario here. And that's, we don't want to live in martial law. But I think one of Doug Ford's better skills as a politician is admitting when he's wrong and admitting he's made a mistake. And to his credit, he was pretty quick to say, all right, we got the message loud and clear. We will not be moving forward with these new kind of police powers to enforce the stay-at-home order.
Yeah, it was like within a day or two, but an internet that's like years, that had already went viral, and Americans were saying, "Oh, Canadians, we gotta invade and take over because we gotta rescue you from a police state." And I'm just like, what is going on? This is.
I'm sure if Doug Ford was looking back on it now, he'd probably say, "Really boned that one up."
Yeah,
he was quick to correct course, and when in a time of COVID, there's no kind of playbook for government. When my 1 year in government, you didn't make decisions in the morning and announce them in the afternoon. You worked on the policies over the course of weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. Now the government is making, decisions at the drop of the hat out of necessity. And there's going to be some, fuck ups along the way. That's just the nature of government. Is not built to respond quickly to,
for sure,
global events like COVID.
Yeah, of course. But this kind of brings up a larger perspective that has been highlighted by COVID, which is sort of like a question of what is the appropriate level of power that a government should have, and how well is that articulated to the people that are under the rule of that government, I guess. Because generally, Americans, I'm speaking broad strokes, Americans would prefer less government, I think, than Canadians, or they put less power and control or decision making into the government's hands. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'd say, I think that's probably a fairly good assessment.
Mm-hmm. And so, in the U.S., when there's sort of draconian measures trying to be implemented by governments, there tends to be outrage and outcry immediately and in vast swaths of the population. And in certain states, they just want their freedom. So regardless of what the government thinks is best, it can only be articulated to the people in a way that they accept it. And so the politicians have to be very careful in how they interact with the public, and the public is in control in those cases. But then you see states like California, for instance, the really left-leaning states tend to have more of a perspective, I think, of like Canada, that, government needs to be there for social care. There's a large proportion of our population that, for whatever reason, just can't take care of themselves properly right now. And it should be okay to support them based on the excesses that other people have enjoyed. And that's a cyclical process, and it exists because, everyone's going to have their ups and downs. You want to be able to be helped up on your down. And so when you're at your peak, you might feel like you're being pulled down a little bit, but it's a temporary thing and it's only a partial measure. But when times are so extreme like COVID, people's anxieties and fear can begin to rule. And especially when a mob mentality can influence the government, that's when you start getting really haphazard, poorly made decisions. I don't think there's a best way around it, but to me it seemed that the more left-leaning governments, at least in the Americas, haven't, probably shouldn't say haven't, they've moved towards increasing government power, basically, and enforcing a particular way of being. And for me, for someone that, is generally okay with the government in Canada, I thought maybe they should let capitalists roam a little more free. For me, I really don't like the increased governmental decision-making. And particularly for me, because I'm a biologist, I understand the science, and I'm being parroted a bunch of bullshit on the daily basis, and I'm not allowed to make decisions for myself. So I'm wondering if you would agree that in extreme times like these, left-leaning governments impose greater governmental power, first of all, and then if you think, what you think about that, I guess.
Yeah, so generally speaking, I think left-leaning governments are way more apt to kind of step into people's day-to-day lives in what they would probably describe as, the greater good. Mm-hmm. I think that's, inherent in their belief system. Mm-hmm. COVID's kind of been an interesting little, I guess we can look back on this, 5-10 years from now, and I'm very interested to see what the books say about it. Yeah. and how the history is told. But the conservative governments in Canada have been just as quick to at times shut down or lock down the economy as some of, I guess, the more left-leaning governments. Mm-hmm. There's an NDP government in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. So if you have people in the States listening, the NDP is the left-wing kind of often described as socialist party. Right. And you've got a conservative government in Ontario. Mm-hmm. If you were to put the two different provinces kind of lockdown approach on a map and asked you to identify which one was which, you'd be surprised that the NDP government's actually been far more open and loose with the rules than the conservative government.
Yeah.
So I think kind of COVID has thrown out the kind of playbook on that. And I think the conservative parties were forced to be a lot more pragmatic and to compromise kind of some of their more inherent values in order to contain the virus. Like, listen, Doug Ford's a businessman. That's kind of was his entire brand before COVID. He was the guy that understood business because I'm a businessman. And he's been the one that shut down the businesses the most. And that's because Ontario is a unique province in the sense that we have our own kind of demographic challenges and economic challenges for why COVID might spread a little bit quicker in Ontario. So I think a lot of political parties have been forced to kind of throw out the ideology and kind of the deep philosophy and stuff and just think about it from a practical perspective.
Right. And I would agree as well. But to me, the people I tend to want to listen to are those that, again, didn't pick ideology going in. They kind of were willing to buck the ideology of whatever group they were in at the moment, issue by issue, if they felt it necessary. So to me, it's really rare, first of all, for someone to be able to stand up to the crowd or the prevailing perspective. But it is incredibly necessary to have those people speak up, especially in distressing times. And I think it's a real shame that in combination with our current era of cancel culture, that it's exactly those people that can't speak up. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things in terms of trends that I've at least seen in Canada is, listen, we're a Western democracy. We elect our politicians. We elect our politicians to make decisions. But what we've seen in COVID has been kind of a transfer of the decision-making process away from politicians towards bureaucrats and doctors. Like we have now in Canada, doctors trotting out and announcing that they've made decisions to shut down certain sectors of the economy. And, whether you agree or disagree with how, Doug Ford in Ontario has handled the pandemic, you will have the opportunity to make that clear when you go and vote in the ballot box, I guess a year from now in 2022. Whether you agree or disagree with some of the more kind of outspoken critics of lockdowns that have existed in Ontario, you will have the opportunity to say that guy was a lunatic who compromised health and safety, or that guy was somebody who stood up for my charter rights and freedoms, or whatever the language you want to use is, and I'm going to go vote accordingly. And that's part of the system. That's why democracy is so great. So I think that's equally as concerning as this kind of transition away from the elected officials who are supposed to take the advice of the doctors, weigh the advice of the doctors. And I would argue, yes, they should certainly be more often than not listening to accepting the advice of the doctors. But also taking the advice of the economists and small business community and everybody else. Them making decisions versus unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats who nobody heard of a year ago.
Yeah. So this will probably be the last main question I ask. But you said that this is the best part of democracy, that you can vote to change things, right? But unfortunately, also I've seen lately, even before the pandemic, but it's really emboldened people now. I've seen a lot of people, particularly academics, at respectable institutions, openly and outwardly claim that they're communist, and that they think that's a good thing. There should be a communist revolution. And that really, really concerns me because, in academia, I had to work with these people, first of all. And these are highly educated people in some respects, but just completely ignorant in many other respects. But I think the general public doesn't understand that those two parts exist in the same individual. So the people that they're asking to do their science, to inform on their decisions, have these political leanings that are very extreme and not informed, well informed, in a way you would expect someone of that caliber of academic rigor to look at their own beliefs. I don't know exactly why that's going on, but it seems that it's coming from the people out of anarchy that are saying, yeah, there's a problem with what's being done now. But instead of electing someone different at the next election, burn everything down and the people take over and the mob rules. And that's better for everyone, because then it's organically from the ground up and you don't have anyone imposing their power on the people unfairly. What would you say to that?
Listen, I think universities and academia and the faculty lounges have always been home to some really kooky people with some really kooky ideas. Mm-hmm. I think you're probably very right that it's gotten a lot worse in the last number of years. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the reason behind that is. It could just be that, professors used to be the people who grew up in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, people who lived with kind of, through the Great Depression and the World Wars. Now the professors are starting to become people who grew up in the 60s and 70s, where it was kind of the whole new cultural revolution. And, every level, they just keep educating more people who then grow up to be kind of the upper echelon of academia. I think conservatives have done particularly conservatives not as a party, but as like kind of a political ideology, a pretty poor job of kind of installing people who are right-leaning into those kind of positions in academia. Yeah. People who typically are conservative end up probably going into backgrounds that are like in maybe more technical skills like business, law, engineering, those types of things. Whereas people who are like left-wing, they generally love to go for the careers in the art, to get those Bachelor of Arts degrees. Yeah. Right. So, and it's again, we discussed it earlier, the wokeness that's starting to become more pervasive across society. Marxism in the 1800s was, based around the thought that people are oppressed based off of their class system. Mm-hmm. Modern day Marxism is based off of kind of the theory that people are oppressed based off of their race or their gender.
You got mixed with critical race theory.
Yeah, less economic Marxism, more cultural Marxism. Mm-hmm. So people who are being taught that stuff in the universities, then they're now filtering down into kind of every facet of society as well, right? Like everybody who gets those Bachelor of Arts degrees where they're taught that type of critical thinking, they then become teachers, they then become, bureaucrats, they then go and
journalists,
profits.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's certainly a problem. Whether it's reversible, I do not know. Mm-hmm. I went to predominantly kind of, I would argue my degree and the students that I was in my kind of program with was very left leaning. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was probably the only person with a conservative kind of viewpoint that ever has graduated with an international development degree. But I always felt that, there was room for debate and room for healthy conversation. I don't think that exists on university campuses anymore.
It doesn't, which is exactly the place it's supposed to be a safe haven for.
So I think that, as governments, we need to do more to promote free speech policies on campus. Mm-hmm. I think that there's some work that can be done there to kind of, it's okay for people to have kooky and wacky ideas on university campus. In fact, that's exactly the place for them.
Exactly.
But you have to be able to have kind of a healthy healthy conversation. And then I think the second
Yeah.
thing is we need to remind people that not everybody needs to go to university.
Yep.
You don't have to go and get your BA in history or political science because that's what your parents did when they were out of high school. You can go and get a skilled trade or become an apprentice somewhere. You'll probably end up being better off.
For sure.
You won't have mountains of student debt and a useless degree I shouldn't say they're useless degrees. They have merit.
Hey man, I'm on your side here in this case.
But yeah, that's kind of my long-winded, inarticulate answer to your question.
I think that was quite articulate and exactly the kind of wind that I was hoping for. I think that's being spoken about in some circles. I think the biggest person you can't really ignore at this point coming out of Canada trying to combat this is Jordan Peterson. And that was happening in Toronto. And it was debates over free speech on campus at the University of Toronto, the best university in Canada, of which he was one of the preeminent professors in the humanities there. In a useful humanity, psychology is a clinical designation. And, he seems to think that it's, the same underpinnings of communism that led to Soviet Russia are the same that are percolating these days. And it just was something that wasn't completely stamped out. And so it wasn't allowed to become the main thing, but it was sort of latently in being incubated in the humanities departments at universities. And then at a certain point, there hit like a critical opening up where, I don't know, just everyone was allowed to spout their own opinions, and the people that shouted the loudest started to win. And it seemed to be that, it was the bureaucrats that were scared of the ideologues, I guess, and stopped doing their job and started letting the mob rule. And it's, I think it's a symptom of the universities and why it's not worth it to go in all cases, in that they've become bloated and full of administrators. The professors and the students at the university serve the administrators, where it used to be that it was designed for the students and it was designed to help the professors teach the students. But now all of them are worried about the paperwork and pleasing HR and the administrators and all of the new DIE criteria. I call it DIE because I think it's really hilarious that the acronym for diversity, inclusivity, and equity stands for DIE. I think it's a subconscious thing that they allowed to slip in because they want all institutions to die. And now they added in a new thing called decolonization. I don't even know what that means. Into science curriculum too. So it's all these scientists that, got into their position by years of being treated like garbage, working crazy hours, getting paid terrible amounts, to get into a position where they're supposed to have freedom to pursue the knowledge and the questions that they want openly. And now they can't do that. And so they've become this sort of like perverted version of a professor that is so gnarled in what's meaningful to them that they can't stand on their own 2 feet. They get spun around too easily or something. I don't know what it is, but I experienced it when I was leaving my degree too. It got really bad the last 2 years or so. I started to see that these inclusivity criteria were expanding, and all that meant was that everyone doing their job had to do more, and you weren't allowed to hire a new professor, but you were allowed to hire 3 new diversity inclusion officers. And so it just became, you can't build the system to fix the problems. You can only build it to increase the amount of work to be done in service of the administrators. And to me, it almost seems like these people got these useless degrees and they started to figure out that they were useless. So they created these positions so that they'd be hired back into academia and HR departments. And now they're everywhere. Now I have to learn all the protected classes at a biotech company that's trying to extend human life.
seems like it doesn't really add up to me. And what even is a protected class? Because I would argue that we should make giftedness a protected class in that case. And maybe that'll solve some things.
I haven't paid nearly as close of attention to what's happening on campus as I probably should, but it all sounds very terrifying.
It's really terrifying. And it's because the way I see it, it's like an avalanche of basically people's insecurity and unstableness, like essentially personality disorder characteristics. Like people have to do some work on themselves because it's not appropriate to just yell and shout and force people to do things. Meeting a wall of like soulless, maskless, spineless people that just get washed over and taken over because they can't stand on their own 2 feet. And it was a slow process, right? Because there weren't problems that were facing the stone people. So that it was allowed to build this, a whole army of these people that couldn't stand on their own 2 feet slowly over time. And then when push comes to shove, when, there's big swings in the electorate or a global pandemic, and so there's huge uproar, they just get toppled. And so it just glaringly shows that people need to stand on their own 2 feet and critically appraise whatever situation it is. And don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in personally, even if it's against the mob of the group that you used to belong to, or even currently belong to. But you should be allowed to disagree with your friends from time to time and talk it out, right?
You're here.
It's not happening. Yeah. So I would say just keep an eye on it. I totally agree with you that we probably need to reevaluate who goes to university and what's it for. And again, Jordan Peterson has some opinions like universities are too expensive. They're not serving the right people. It's just unlimited jobs for administrators. So make them only necessary to get an accreditation to be like a doctor, where you're trying to save lives, or an engineer, where you need to follow certain guidelines. The humanities, you can learn all online yourself at this point. You could even have like a really well-known university make all their courses available online. I think you can do everything you can do in a humanities classroom online, have the people read along at their own pace. Then you just cut out all of the cost of the infrastructure of providing that education, give people that education, and then if they want to have a useful profession as well, they get the accreditation. But it doesn't have this bloat that then carries a bunch of angry young people that are poor, that then hate the system, and they feel oppressed, and they hate corporations and business people because those people got rich, and some of them barely went through college or dropped out or whatever. So that resentment builds because of the positions they kind of put themselves in. So I think you're right. There's multiple factors that need to change here for a new world, and I think we're seeing the reckoning happen. Whether we learn for it or not is still up for debate.
Wow, lots to digest there.
Yeah. Well, I've had too much time on my hands. It's I moved to a different country. I wasn't allowed to meet anyone. I have a couple friends here. I get to see them, a couple times a week if I'm lucky. But can't really get to know my coworkers that well. A lot of work online or a lot of isolated work, things like that. And so, I've had a lot of time to read and study
and ponder and scheme, and this is something that's come out of all that stewing and scheming, and just, missing connection, missing talking to brilliant people like you and my other friends around the world. And so I think it's the perfect time to just have the conversations, really.
And conversations are always good.
Yeah. And I'm not afraid of it. And I have some really brilliant friends that I love to talk it through with. And you guys are what informs me and what teaches me. And all my friends can see things that I can't. And so I think it's really important that I stay in touch with everyone and take everyone's perspective. So thanks so much for doing this with me.
Appreciate it. It was a great time.
So this has been Bridge to the Bay with Dr. Veras, with more to come.